Can we just begin by asking you what you want to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg this week?
I think what we want to hear, this is a fact-finding hearing, a series of fact-finding hearings, and really the question ought to be, what should Congress do in response to this? Are the laws already adequate? Were they just violated and need to be enforced better? To what extent did Facebook violate its own internal policies? And what needs to be done to prevent this in the future? So it ought to be a situation not of gotcha, but going forward from here, seeing if laws have been violated or if laws need to be changed to protect the public.
Senator, what's your initial impression?
Well, my initial impression is that Facebook sort of winked at privacy concerns and allowed this to happen. But I'm willing to listen to Mr. Zuckerberg in person on this. But clearly, I think most people think there was a breach of trust, and we need to get to the bottom of how that happened. Did they violate the law, or did they violate their own policies?
Well, Senator, I think something
what needs to be done going forward.
Something that investors are trying to get their head around is if you decide from these hearings that ultimately that Facebook's own internal controls are inadequate, what does regulation look like from Washington, D.C.? What kind of regulations have you got in mind? What can you do?
Listen, I have an open mind about what we need to do going forward, and I really think that ought to be the approach of most members of the committee. I do not have legislation in mind. I don't think the FTC has new regulations in mind. I think we'll be listening to what we find out, and I'll tell you, generally speaking, I come down on the side of a light touch regulation. I think the internet has thrived. It has been the engine of our economy and economic growth for 3 decades, 2.5 or 3 decades, and we need to be careful with over-regulation. At the same time, if something needs to be done, if the laws aren't adequate to protect privacy, to protect the sort of wholesale selling of private information, then we need to look at that. But I am reluctant to over-regulate because the internet has been so great for the economy and for Americans in general.
Senator, are you confident that market forces can take care of the business for you? And the reason I ask that question is because with this particular situation with Facebook, the stock market has hit Facebook pretty hard. But in terms of the company, the guidance that we've had from them so far is that the users aren't fleeing and the advertisers don't really have anywhere else to go, so they're sticking with Facebook. So it does raise the question as whether Facebook actually has the incentives internally that are provided to them from natural market forces to make the necessary changes. Are you confident they do?
I think market forces are part of it, but I certainly don't think we ought to rely on that. We need to look at what the mix is. But I would never say that market forces alone are going to take care of this, and we don't even need to consider something new from either a regulatory or statutory standpoint. But we'll be looking at it, Mr. Zuckerberg is not the only one we will eventually listen to when it comes to what needs to be done. I expect we're going to have consumers in. We're probably going to have advertisers in, members of the public, and consumer protection advocates. So this is just the start of looking into this. But to answer your question, I don't have absolute confidence that the market will take care of this alone.
So, Senator, just to conclude, I think many of our viewers would like sort of an understanding of the direction of the questioning over the next couple of days. In your mind, what are the areas of weakness that does not have sufficient explanation so far from the company that you'll be probing?
Well, I'll be probing whether they violated the law, whether they feel that they violated the law, whether they violated FTC regulations. You know, we already have HIPAA, we already have Gramm-Leach Bliley. There are a number of state laws which we need to look into. And so I'm just going to be asking very straightforward questions. I have no idea what my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will be asking.
Senator, some crazy conversations about what the CEO of Facebook might or might not be wearing, whether he turns up in a hoodie or a suit. I think most of us assume that is ridiculous. Does that kind of thing bother you at all, Senator?
That doesn't bother me at all. I understand he's going to wear a coat and tie, and that would certainly be more traditional, but he'll be well received and politely received no matter how he dresses, and we'll still ask the questions, and I hope they'll be probing and tough and relevant.